What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Indivisible Weekly. It's the 39th episode of our series, and we're so excited to bring you another exciting update on Recovery Recess and how you can get involved in the fight to save our democracy. Now, we have a lot to talk about, so let's dive in. Now, we are in the last few days of recess, the time when members of Congress should be in their home districts talking to constituents like you about the issues that you think they should be fighting for in Congress. Now, as we talked about last week, Indivisibles are hard at work, making their voices heard on democracy reform and the Thrive agenda. Joining us again with another exciting update on the incredible work that Indivisibles are doing is Sarah Rieske from our organizing team. Sarah?
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Rieske. I'm the Senior Regional Organizer with Indivisible based in New York State, and I'm back to talk to you about the amazing work that just some Indivisible groups are doing as they rock the second week of Recovery Recess. First up, Colorado. Indivisible groups work together to publish an op-ed about eliminating the filibuster in the Denver Post. This is the most widely read newspaper in the state, very influential, and especially because it catches the eyes of their two senators, Hickenlooper and Bennett, who still need to come out in full support of eliminating the filibuster so we can get all the good things that we as Americans in this country deserve. Also using the newspaper to plant seeds and help change public opinion were Florida and Mississippi groups who held statewide letter to the editor writing events. March recess wouldn't be complete without having statewide meetings with their senators, so Minnesota groups organized a statewide meeting with a senior policy manager from Senator Tina Smith's office so that they could have a frank conversation about voting rights, representation, as well as the Thrive agenda. Way to go, Minnesota groups. I am super proud of what we are doing here in New York. We have our Climate, Jobs, and Justice Week of Action. We have over 50 visits scheduled with state legislators to talk about a state climate bill called the CCIA. We also have 10 meetings with Democratic members of Congress to talk about Thrive and how we want them to advocate and organize inside Congress to integrate the Thrive agenda into the recovery bill. We want New York Democrats leading on this effort. We also have amazing rallies happening across the state on Wednesday, and our capstone event is a conversation about the CCIA with state legislators, as well as Senator Chuck Schumer on the Thrive agenda and how he's going to get it through the Senate. We're building lots of power together, Indivisibles, with our partner NY Renews and their organizations for our first joint movement week of action during Recovery Recess. New York is leading on, and we're so excited for what's more to come. I want you to join in efforts that are local to where you are, because we're making political activism bite-sized, local, and fun. Follow Indivisible on Facebook and Twitter. Don't miss out on a single action near you.
Sarah, thank you so much for the update. And as Sarah said, there's still time to get involved. So click the link in the description below and find an event near you today. And make sure you tune in next week when Sarah will be back with one last update on the incredible work that Indivisibles around the country have done throughout recess. And if you want more context on the democracy reform bills that we're fighting for during recess, as well as the Thrive agenda, check out the description below, where we have links to various resources and explainer videos that you won't want to miss. Now, speaking of democracy reforms, things are starting to move very quickly in the fight to make DC the 51st state. And next week is a huge week to get the word out about DC statehood. Starting next Wednesday, April 14th, the House will be marking up H.R. 51, the DC statehood bill, bringing it one step closer to a vote on the House floor. Then on Thursday, in recognition of Tax Day, Indivisible groups will be uplifting the importance of DC statehood and how residents of DC pay federal taxes and yet have no representation in Congress. And then on Friday is DC Emancipation Day, which celebrates the day when thousands of slaves in the district were freed several months before the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves nationally. It is going to be a big week for one of our biggest democracy-saving priorities. And every day we're getting closer and closer to DC statehood becoming a reality, and every day we're seeing more and more people talking about DC statehood. And it's not surprising, because DC statehood is an issue that everyone can relate to, regardless of whether or not you live in DC. But don't take it from me, take it from Mary, a former DC resident who sent us this video to point out one of the many absurdities of DC's lack of statehood.
Hi, my name is Mary. I used to live in Washington, D.C. when I was younger and just starting out in my career. Now I live in Vermont. Vermont has fewer people than Washington, D.C., and yet we have representation in Congress. It's just wrong that the people of Washington, D.C. do not have representation. I support D.C. statehood, and I hope you do too.
Mary, thanks so much for submitting your video. And you're right, it's just wrong that tax-paying DC residents don't have voting representation in Congress. And if you're as mad about that as I am, or as Mary is, we want to hear from you. Click the link in the description below and record a video today, demanding that your members of Congress support DC statehood. Now, one thing that we talk about a lot in our democracy campaign is the filibuster, and the fact that it's gotten in the way of pretty much everything we're trying to do. Obviously, the filibuster has got to go if we want to save our democracy. But we've gotten a lot of very good questions from folks who are wondering why we can't just rely on budget reconciliation, since that process allows us to pass some bills with just 51 votes. And it makes sense to ask the question. I mean, budget reconciliation worked for the American Rescue Plan, so it must work for some of our other priorities, right? Well, not exactly. For many reasons, the budget reconciliation process is flawed, unsustainable, and in a lot of cases, just not applicable. For more on this, here's Indivisible's Andrew O'Neill.
Hi, I'm Andrew, Senior Economic Justice Policy Manager with Indivisible. Over the last few months, I've been laser focused on helping to get the most progressive and inclusive COVID relief legislation possible passed into law. This meant helping Indivisible's team of organizers have the latest information about negotiations in Congress to share with Indivisible groups across the country, working with our allies on the Hill to lock in progressive victories, and fighting back against efforts from Republicans and even moderate Democrats to weaken the package.
The bill as amended is passed.
The American Rescue Plan was ultimately passed through a process known as budget reconciliation. Now that the American Rescue Plan has been signed into law, let's look back at how the reconciliation process works and why getting rid of the Senate filibuster is a better option. So, Democrats were right to choose a legislative pathway for the American Rescue Plan that could be passed with a simple majority in the Senate. Otherwise, we know Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans would have obstructed urgently needed pandemic relief, running out the clock while communities suffered. But instead of just getting rid of the filibuster, Democrats decided to use budget reconciliation, a procedural tool meant to fast-track budget legislation in the Senate that's not subject to the 60-vote filibuster threshold. Sounds great, right? The problem with reconciliation is it comes with a whole load of strings attached, from restrictions on what sorts of policies can be included to strict and arbitrary limits on funding levels. So let's take a look at how this worked. Policies can only be included in a reconciliation bill that are directly related to taxes or spending. So even though President Biden included things like guaranteed paid leave and raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, those policies did not make it into the final bill because of those restrictions.
It is a huge setback for Democrats who were bullish on the prospect that it would survive.
Reconciliation effectively forced Democrats to break those commitments. We also saw critical priorities like enhanced unemployment insurance chipped away at, in part because the overall package was subject to an arbitrary $1.9 trillion limit, pitting necessary policies against each other. With so many crises to deal with, it's irresponsible to force the solutions to compete in this way. We should instead embrace the necessary public investments that we need to build a more just and equitable economy and society. So, while there are some great things in the American Rescue Plan, it's clear that budget reconciliation was a flawed tool to address the pandemic, or any crisis for that matter. Other priorities, from DC statehood and democracy reform to labor rights and taking on the climate crisis, simply cannot be done through a clunky and limited process like budget reconciliation. Fortunately, the solution is simple. Democrats can simply eliminate the filibuster to pass their agenda with a majority of votes. You know how a democracy ought to work. Here's how you can get involved, because it's going to take all of us to make that happen. If you're represented by Democrats in the Senate, make sure you're calling their offices. Let them know you expect them to fulfill their promises, and hiding behind the filibuster is unacceptable. Take action locally with your local Indivisible group, and talk to your friends and family about getting involved too. You can even share this video with them. And definitely keep an eye out for additional opportunities for action from Indivisible. Thanks for watching, and thanks for joining us in the fight to eliminate the filibuster.
Andrew, thanks so much for breaking that down for us. For more on why we need to abolish the filibuster and how doing other things like reforming it just won't cut it, be sure to check out our filibuster resource in the description below. Thanks so much for watching this week's episode of Indivisible Weekly. Be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the links in the description below for more ways that you can get involved. Thanks everyone, take care, and I'll see you next week.